Summer's out, but can you listen on?
When I was around 10 years old, my mother sent me away to summer camp for a week with my cousin. I thought it would be fun because my cousin and I got along very well. The first couple of days in summer camp were fun, just as I'd hoped. I started to get into the flow of how the activities work, and how the other kids were. I generally got along with all of them. While my camp was going on, so was another camp in the same building. The other camp was for children with special needs, and our camp would always have lunch at the same time as their camp would. We'd all have lunch together, and everything was always fine. Around the second day of camp, I noticed a girl from the other camp sitting by herself, with an intense scowl on her face. I wondered why she was sitting alone while all of the other kids were having fun. She seemed to be ignored. The more I watched her, the more I noticed her strange tendencies. She would whisper to herself while staring into space, and sometimes she would rock slowly back and forth. Being the adorable ball of innocence and sunshine that I was, I thought she just needed a friend. Maybe she was talking to herself because no one would talk to her. I decided to approach her. I introduced myself and she didn't acknowledge me whatsoever. I persisted, trying to make small talk by asking her simple questions. "What's your name?" was answered with silence. Finally, I gave up and said, "Why won't you talk to me?" She finally turned her head towards me and looked at me. She said, "They can hear us." I thought she was talking about the counselors. I figured she was incredibly shy. I asked her why it mattered if they heard us. Her eyes widened as if she was shocked to hear that I didn't know the answer to that question myself. She told me that they were watching, and that they wouldn't want her to talk about them. At this point, I thought she was batshit crazy. I agreed with her, so as not to offend her, and lunchtime ended. We went back to our separate camps. I was unable to focus on any activities, though. I kept thinking about what the girl had said. I couldn't get my mind off her, even when I went back to my cousin's house. The next day is the reason I never went back to summer camp. I was incredibly anxious to go to lunch and talk to the girl. I was the first person from my camp to enter the cafeteria. I sat by the girl and listened to her whisper to herself. Only she wasn't whispering to herself. She was whispering to them. She said things like, "Don't do that. I don't want that. All of them think I'm crazy. And please, stop." She said lots of other things, but those are the ones that really stood out to me. She'd say those things over and over. I asked her who they were. She jolted her head in my direction and said that she couldn't tell me. They would hear. Then I made the mistake of asking her why she was afraid of them. Her exact words were, "Now you've done it. They're coming for us. They're going to get all of us." She got up and bolted for the doors and left. The whole few days I'd known this girl, she always whispered and moved slowly, but not that day. That day she frightened me. The fear on her face made me afraid, without knowing what I was afraid of. A little later in the afternoon was the award ceremony for the first half of the week. I remember that I had to go to the bathroom in the beginning of the ceremony. When I returned, the counselor towards the back of the room made me stay in the back so I wouldn't interrupt the ceremony. I was fine with that. I noticed that the girl was sitting in the seat next to me. I don't know how I didn't notice right away, but I didn't. It was like she appeared out of nowhere. She was whispering to me this time, telling me that they were coming today. The counsellor nearest me told me not to pay her any mind, when it was too late for that. She was already in my head, or maybe it was they who were in my head. The next thing I know, I'm standing at the front of the room above a girl that was receiving an award. Apparently, I walked all the way to the front to punch her in the face. Her nose bled and the counsellor screamed and took me to the back of the room and were about to call my parents. I looked back at the crazy girl and saw that she was grinning and laughing at me. Then I looked back at the girl I punched and realized she was the one that picked on the crazy girl on a daily basis. The crazy girl was by my side. I hadn't noticed her get up because I was still trying to understand what had just happened to me. The girl turned to me and told me not to worry. My head was spinning. I was so confused. That's when the girl suddenly stiffened and stared at the ceiling. She screamed, "They are here! They're here!" at the top of her lungs. At that exact moment, all of the lights went out. Now, this was the massive blackout of 2003 in New York. The rest of that week, I could hardly sleep. The girl was no longer at summer camp, and when I asked about her, no one knew who I was talking about. Apparently, there were lots of kids that whispered to themselves in that camp. I even asked the girl that I punched. She just told me to get away from her. I always tell myself that it was a coincidence that the blackout happened when she said they were here. Maybe she just got sick and couldn't return to the camp. Maybe her parents needed the money and took her out of the camp. Maybe they had something to do with her disappearance. Maybe I invented the girl to keep me company while I sat alone at lunch and whispered to them.
Being young and bold and trying to step out of my comfort zone, I decided to accept a job at a summer camp in Hawaii. I spent 3 months out there, and I have to say, being born and raised in a landlocked state like Colorado, it was quite a shock integrating into a habitat that was the polar opposite of what I'd been accustomed to my entire life. I just got back a couple of days ago. It was a fantastic and life-changing experience, but it's good to be home. One reason being that I have technology again. This camp was in the middle of absolute nowhere, an infernal black hole that sucked all reception and Wi-Fi and decimated it into oblivion. This is all relevant because I had some odd occurrences that I wanted to share with the public in order to get explanations and hopefully some closure. But I, of course, had no means to do it until now. Have you ever been by yourself, closed your eyes, and sworn that you weren't alone? This is a sensation that I've grown to abhor. It was the first week here at camp, and I was nervous as hell. I was eager to start this new adventure up until the very first moment I was in Hawaii. The second I stepped off the plane, I saw a cockroach fly onto a man's face. So it was easy to see from that point on, I was a little apprehensive. The friends I made alleviated my fear of the uncharted territory very quickly, though. We were a ragtag bunch from all over the states, some from other countries as well, and I'm not sure if it was due to our chemistry or the looming fact that we would see each other every single day for the next couple of months, but we all got along almost instantaneously. The camp facilities were all built in a clearing of dirt and dead grass, dry and inhospitable to bare feet. There were 6 or 7 weathered buildings that littered around the area in an unorganized fashion, with the dining hall being the hub of it all, and the cabin quarters scattered around the outskirts. The only redeeming quality of this area was that it was built on the beach, so I was always less than a minute away from the ocean. At first glance, it seemed like the camp was in a perfect area, but after looking around more, I realized it was actually in an intriguing location. While one side of the camp was backed up against the beach, every other side was surrounded by these woods. The perimeter around the camp was settled with thick, gnarling trees, with branches, I swear to God, like fingers clawing toward the sky. The woods started to invade the edges of the camp like frost, slowly creeping in from the corners of a window pane, giving this summer camp this freakish, gothic prominence, unfortunate for places that harbor laughter and play. It was about noon, and we'd just finished lunch when all the camp counselors were led into a thicket of the woods. It had been a couple of days since I got to camp, and I was already pretty good friends with most of the other counselors. Regardless, the camp counselor deemed it necessary that we still learned more about each other and ourselves by partaking in a couple of cliché trust exercises and team building games, practicing, of course, on each other before we taught them to the campers that were starting to come next week. The first exercise we did was the classic blindfold game. For those unfamiliar with this game, everyone is paired up with one partner, and one is blindfolded while the other partner has to guide them verbally toward a goal. I paired up with this really cute girl named Clara and volunteered to be the one blindfolded first. She tied the bandana around my eyes and spun me around for about 20 seconds or so. Once I was completely disoriented and stumbling around, Clara started shouting out directions, giggling with every instruction.
All right, turn to your left and take 10 steps forward. No, turn slightly and walk forward 6 steps, and watch out for the tree branch.
This went on for a couple more minutes before I guess I misheard what she'd said and walked too far in one direction. While I was walking, something didn't feel right because everything became muffled. With each step I took, the sounds of other people, the wind, the birds, the crashing waves of the ocean, even the sound of my own footsteps melted away until there was complete and utter silence. That's when I felt it. Even though I could only see the blackness of the blindfold over my eyes, every hair on my body stood on end. I felt that inches away there was someone standing right in front of me. I knew it. I could sense it, and I could feel their presence only inches away from me. Instinctively, I called out,
Clara, is that you?
But as I reached out in front of me, I felt nothing. There wasn't anything there. The second I put my hands down, the same sense of dread immediately overcame me. This time I felt like someone was so close in front of me that they could have leaned in and touched me. I fell back in a panic and ripped the blindfold off my eyes, only to be greeted by the scene that I was initially a part of. The warmth of the sunlight cascaded down onto my brow as I saw all of the other camp counselors either aimlessly wandering around blindfolded or shouting and laughing at the helplessness of their partner. The birds clamored to one another, and the ocean conversed through its breaking waves. The person nearest me was Clara, who was 30 feet away. She ran over with a very concerned look struck on her face.
Hey, you all right? Clara, were you messing with me the entire time?
I sharply retorted.
What do you mean? I was talking to Holly for a couple of seconds, and when I looked back, you were on the ground. When I had the blindfold on, I felt someone standing right in front of me.
She changed her look from one that was sympathetic to one that thought I was a little mentally unstable.
No one was near you. As you see, you ended up walking in the complete opposite direction of the goal, even with my precise directions.
She giggled again and started to walk back to the group as we were starting the next team building game. She was lying. I knew it. That sense of someone standing in front of me was so real. It was so unnerving and put me on edge all the rest of the day. This sensation of fear and paranoia invaded my thoughts and emotions and slowly grinded me down. By the end of the day, I was so exhausted that right after dinner I went back to my cabin and collapsed into bed. As my vision faded and I slowly passed out, one thought came to my mind. I had to try it again. We were given the next day off. The camp director knew we worked our asses off training and preparing for the long weeks of unrelenting work yet to come, so he decided to give us a full day to go and enjoy ourselves. I was so tired from the previous night that I slept completely through breakfast and woke up just in time for lunch. After I ate, I slipped away to head back to the same part of the woods we were in yesterday. After a few minutes of searching, I found the exact spot I stood in before. It was at the base of a tree that had no branches and stood straighter than the rest. The ground underneath was layered with blankets of dirt and rotting leaves. I stood by the tree, my feet sinking into the decaying foliage, and it began to mold around my shoes as if it was inviting me to stand there for the rest of eternity. Once again, I tied the blindfold around my eyes and proceeded to spin for another 20 seconds or so. Then I waited. It was only a couple of seconds before the same feeling I would come to loathe began to burrow itself under my skin and fester. The paranoia and sinking feeling that someone was standing in front of me paralyzed my nervous system. This feeling came much worse than before because I knew for a fact that I was completely alone. I tried to keep the blindfold on for as long as possible while the trepidation engulfed me entirely. Every little hair on the back of my neck was about to rip itself out of my skin by the follicle as I could feel this person inching closer and closer to me. I kept my hands to my sides, seeing how far I could push my threshold of terror. At this point, I was shaking, but I knew my will was strong and I could manage to endure this sensation for a couple more minutes, until I felt a warm breath on the back of my neck. I broke down and started running wildly, flailing with one hand while trying to take off the blindfold with the other. When I finally managed to get the stupid thing off, I saw what I feared most. Nothing. I saw absolutely nothing. There was nobody there, and I was completely alone, with trees that have remained sentinels for centuries. I was panting, still shaking, and covered in a cold sweat. I was in desperate need of a shower, since I was too shaken up to take one yesterday, so I headed back to my cabin and rinsed off, in hopes to also clear my mind. Nobody was in the cabin when I stepped into the shower, and I was actually quite relieved. I didn't want anyone to see me post-shock, and I really didn't want to explain myself and my absurdity. Halfway through the shower, I closed my eyes while I rinsed the shampoo out of my hair. That was when I felt it again. I was speared through the gut with this fear that someone was in the room, watching me shower. I opened my eyes, letting the soapy water stream into them and sting me and half blind me. Behind the shower curtain, there was the silhouette of a figure. A scream managed to escape my throat, and as it did, I slipped backwards and had like what felt the porcelain wall of the shower hit the base of my skull. I woke up with a jerk and bolted upright, scared for my life. My eyes were open, yet all I could see was this blackness. Oh, damn, I must have hit my head so hard I was sort of blind. I was on the verge of tears because of this newfound life-changing moment, when I felt something crinkle up on the bridge of my nose. It was the blindfold. I slid the bandana off and was drowned in relief. I felt idiotic for jumping at such a childish conclusion. But that moment was short-lived when I finally looked around and recognized where I was. I wasn't in the shower, or even in the cabin. I was lying in a mound of damp dirt and rotting leaves, underneath a tree that had no branches, and stood straighter than the rest. I was wearing the same clothes as I was when I first entered the woods earlier, and yet again, I was completely alone. My initial thought was that I did something really stupid like spin around too fast or too long and passed out as a result. I was trying to recall walking back to the cabin and taking that shower. It was all so very vivid, so I guess I just had a crazy dream. A gentle breeze tumbled through the woods and brought with it a taste of salty air. As the wind caressed and cooled me, I came to a realization that made my heart stop. My hair was still wet.